Welcome, everybody. This is Hugh Massie, the chairman and founder of DNA Behaviour International. And today I'm delighted to be hosting another identity conversation. And I've got the great pleasure to have with me Kenzie Biggins, who is the CEO, founder of Worxbee Solutions, which is in the executive assistant recruiting area and providing solutions to corporate America. And Kenzie, it's great to have you with me.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for having me.
So, Kenzie, why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about your life and career background and how you got to this place of starting Worxbee?
Yes. So I actually started my career in corporate America, which is a far away from cry from where I'm from. I grew up in a household where I felt like, yeah, corporate America is where you end up. It's where you're safe. I actually was in the retail space for both Target, Bank of America, and went back to Target. But literally woke up one day and was like, you're supposed to be doing something more, something bigger with your life. So decided to go back to grad school at Savannah College of Art and Design, actually their Atlanta campus, and got my master's in luxury and fashion management, and wrote my graduate thesis on improving the American economy through the production of luxury goods. So how do we take a skill-based labor force and connect them to meaningful work that's really driven by a skill set that they have that you just can't go and learn in the classroom overnight, but actually takes time to develop and hone. So from there, thought, okay, you're going back to corporate America. This is what you do. There's healthcare, there's steady pay. You're going back to corporate America. But found myself running a social media agency as simply a let's fill in the gaps while we're waiting. This was also on the heels of the Great Recession. So, you know, work, position, things were still just really filling out. So I started a social media agency, and in that process started getting questions about virtual assistants, because people thought if you knew one thing about the internet, you knew everything about the internet. I mean, this was 2011 to 2013. And I got the question enough that I was like, there's something here. I should go figure out what it is and what needs to happen. And found myself in a meeting with a retiring executive from Coca-Cola who was like, I have a meeting in 30 minutes. And I was like, okay, great. But why are you telling me? And she was like, I went from this full team supporting me to now I retired this week and I have nobody supporting me. And I had no clue how my calendar was being kept, how everything was being organized. And I was like, that's funny. I keep getting this question about virtual assistants, but maybe our niche is virtual executive assistants. And that also really spoke to me to niche in that much, because it took me back to my thesis and thinking once again about how do we take this specialty skill set and connect them to meaningful work.
So a lot of what you're saying there is that you started Worxbee because you saw the market niche. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you were running a social media agency. You'd started one.
Yes.
And people were regularly asking you about this niche area of having virtual assistants or virtual executive assistants.
Yeah, and it was out of nowhere, because I'm like, I just told you I ran a social media agency. Why are you asking me about virtual assistants? Like, there was no connection, but it was simply, this unknown land of the internet and what all could happen on the internet. So I started getting lots of questions because I was becoming an authority figure in that space.
And were the virtual assistants that you were being asked about to be the support staff of an executive, or is it to build out a whole team of people at lower cost rates to, if you want to call it, optimize the sales process?
So I was given no context. People were just like, do you know virtual assistants? Do you have virtual assistants? Where's a virtual assistant? And I was just like, I don't know. But I think for me, it was 2013. I was thinking about a couple of major things. One, we were still coming out of the Great Recession. So I was thinking about all of these executive assistants who had been laid off, who wanted to get back into the workforce, but doing what they love, right? Yeah. I think one of the things that really impacted us during the Great Recession was everything went very operations focused. And we forgot about all the things around that we need to take place. Like, I think about walking into a retail store and everything became about getting the merchandise off the truck versus the customer service of helping people find the merchandise on the sales floor. Same type of comparison as far as you had all these amazingly skilled executive assistants who were being put in these operational roles, like, work in the call center or help clear up email requests, versus their skill set is really that executive mindset of how they support someone and how they help their executive move forward and look like a rock star, which is not simply checking items off a list.
So somewhere in there, you're talking about creating an experience as well, aren't you? The organization creating an experience for its customers, but also the executive assistant getting a meaningful experience themselves, because an experience won't get created for the customer unless the employees or the team members have an experience as well.
Yes.
Is that part of was that part of the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's the experience, but it's also the culture of what's happening, right? And making sure that there's a value on both sides.
Yeah.
I found, especially very early in the company, for lots of people, having an EA was a status symbol more than it was respecting the person that was supporting them and making everything happen magically behind the scenes. And there was this misunderstanding of the fact that you had to build a relationship with someone, and the fact that the person supporting you, especially when you are working with contractors, that it's a human being on the other side of the phone or on the other side of the computer. So we had to do some internal digging, and it took a while for us to figure out a process, but to really be able to say no to clients who didn't understand that there has to be a relationship on the other side, and no to EAs too, who are just like, oh, I'm just here for a check. It can't just be about that, because it really is a long-term relationship. I say all the time, your administrative support is your closest relationship to your significant other. They know everything about you. And if you're not willing to form a relationship with that person, you're not serious about what it takes to get the proper support you need.
Well, I can tell you that there will be some executive assistants listening to this call today on the DNA behavior team, because probably since about the time that you started Worxbee, or at least getting asked the questions, we started using the virtual assistants, and that's a big part of our business model. We've got them in 4 countries, in doing different things. But we started back about that time, and a lot of it was to improve our customer support and be able to provide it 24/7. So we needed people in different time zones, and also to enhance the sales process.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So that's how we thought about it. But as it's gone along, they're just as much part of the team, and they're in the team huddles and team meetings and processes as everybody else is.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more, Kenzie, about meaningful work and what you learned out of the PhD that you were doing, or not the PhD, but the
master's. I was going to say PhD. My mother would be so proud. No,
well, you can always lie, can't you? A little bit to your mother.
No.
Mum will probably say yes, but so your master's.
Yes. So my master's program. So I am very much a creative who probably didn't understand myself as much as that point in time, as I've learned to understand myself, in the last 4 years. So what I didn't know going into my master's, and of course, when I call my parents and I say, hey, I know a recession's starting, but I'm going to quit my job and go back to grad school because I'm supposed to be doing something bigger with my life. My mother's like, really? Like, you have a job, you have a place, like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, go get your MBA. But I knew that wasn't for me. Like, I can take a test, but I'm not a great test taker. Like, I understand finances, but if you give me a finance test, I'm not going to pass it. So what I didn't understand at that time was that I'm dyslexic. I actually didn't find that out until I was 39. And it's because I went to a school actually in Atlanta called the Atlanta Speech School that figured out that early that dyslexia was really on a spectrum, and speech pattern was a part of dyslexia. My parents, not knowing that I had dyslexia, knew something was up and sent me to the Atlanta Speech School. So they treated me for dyslexia without formally diagnosing me, because if they did, I wouldn't have gotten the proper support that I needed. forced into a special education program that wouldn't have treated the form of dyslexia I have. So I walked into SCAD, one, loving being in a creative space. I mean, I went to a great private school in Atlanta after I left the speech school. I went to Florida State for undergrad, but coming out of school in 99, like it wasn't really accepted that you were going to art school. Like that was really for, just the artists who were like drawing and painting and sculpting all day long. And I wasn't that person, but I was a creative, right?
Yeah.
So to have this experience of, telling my parents, no, I don't think an MBA is for me. There's this master's program at Savannah College of Art and Design. I can get my luxury and fashion management, which really was focused on like branding and logistics and how do you look at that all-encompassing market to get there. And it allowed me to be myself. Like I say, I'm probably one of the luckiest people in the world because my parents have allowed me to be myself my whole life. But to then be in a learning environment where, I probably took like 3 or 4 tests while I was there. Most of them were probably finance tests, but I only took a handful of tests while I was there because it was focused on like the project and receiving feedback and delivering outcomes and pushing a product forward and down the road. So just really, it opened my mind to how it can all work. It also made me feel like, oh, like you really do have answers to a lot of problems. I think one of the things that was frustrating for me being in corporate America is I could see a problem. Also, part of that was because how my brain is conditioned from being dyslexic. Even not knowing I was dyslexic, I always had to work quickly in order to make up for like, I need to figure out how to say this word before the teacher calls on me to say the word out loud. So I could always see problems before they were happening or as they were happening. So then to be in a creative environment where it's like, oh, it's celebrated that you can see the problem. Then how do you teach yourself to work on the other side of that problem and make larger things happen? It was great to be in that type of environment, but also to see how it can apply in the business world and how I could move it forward. I think I was the kid who was always like, I'm going to have a company one day, but I think we're all kind of conditioned that corporate America, well, there was a point where we were all conditioned that corporate America is just where you're going to end up. And it had to be the really daring person to go off and start a company. So I think being back in grad school, even though I thought I was going to go back to corporate America, it gave me the freedom of like, you're already broke and living in a basement apartment. Why not start a company? Because you don't have those same stresses as you did before.
So you have nothing to lose in some ways when you're in that situation and you've got everything to gain, particularly if you you can go and work in corporate America because you're highly educated.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, in a way, seeing what you can do on the street.
Yes. But even with that said, I've always wondered, I was having this has been a big thought for me in the last probably year and a half. Like, what would my trajectory have looked like in corporate America? Because I've definitely encountered people who appreciate my outside of the box thinking. I had the honor of doing an internship with Walmart while I was in grad school, and I was under Roz Brewer, who's now the CEO of Walgreens, and Don Frison, who headed logistics for her. And like, they got it, right? And I feel like at that top corporate level, for me to come in with my outside of the box thinking and solutions, like it would be very well perceived as like, oh, visionary vision, like let's move this forward. But I'm not sure what type of path corporations or even small businesses sometimes set for the visionary to be able to grow within an organization. Because lots of times the visionary is the person asking too many questions.
Well, a little while ago in the call, I was thinking, just something you said made me think of these words. And so I'll say them now because they came back to me again, but you would be a caged tiger.
Yes.
In corporate America. And I think that's the problem when you're a true entrepreneur and you need a higher level of personal growth. You want to prove things to the world. And also you can see, you visionary from being creative, you can see problems out there that need to be solved, and they may not all get solved in the corporate America world. You might be, you could be disappointed. It's not saying you couldn't be successful there, but you might be miserable on the journey. And I think, you know, I was in corporate, not in corporate America, but I suppose corporate Australia, but I was in an American firm in accountancy, and I got to that place a while in there. I thought, okay, I'm meant to be doing this and go all the way to the top. But somewhere I knew inside me, no, it's wrong. And I sometimes wonder, okay, what would life be like if I'd stayed there?
Right. I think it's a big question I think corporations need to think about, as far as what do the future of corporations look like, as far as how they're growing corporate leaders. I think it's also interesting that, you know, and I say this all the time, people throw around the word visionary, like, oh, it's super sexy, I'm visionary. And I'm like, no, being visionary is actually, it can be very scary and daunting, because you feel like a caged tiger. There's all these things you want to do and all these ways you want to help. And, you know, this bigger picture that you can see that can be very intimidating and scary to people. So I don't know, now my brain's like, how do we help corporations figure this out? But that's another problem for another day.
But visionary is one thing, and I think bring it back to your business. Having a vision is one thing, but execution's another.
Yes.
And that's very important to be able to tie the two together. Otherwise, you'll be an idea a minute and execute on nothing, and therefore succeed on nothing. And so if we link those together and say, Kenzie, in Worxbee, you could see a new market was coming back there some years ago for virtual assistants, particularly executive assistants. You've got a set of values that are developing and beliefs that are developing around meaningful work. And you can see, okay, there's a market here, because people are asking me all day long. But how did you bring those things together in terms of a business plan that could be executed? Because clearly, you know, you've been doing this for some years now and your business is growing at a rate of knots. There's something that you've been making happen.
Yeah.
In terms of the execution and how you bring on the executive assistants and how you retain them.
Yeah. And so several, I guess 3 things there. So one, I had a finance professor when I was in grad school. And when I first came up with the idea for this company, I went and sat down with him, like, what do I need to be thinking about? What am I missing? Because like I said, you know, finance, not my thing, much better now than I was then. And he was like, Kenzie, you're the type of person who could come up with 80 ideas a second. So one, you have to commit that you're 5 years all in. And then at the end of that 5 years, you make a choice about whether you renew for being 5 years all in to make that happen. So I feel like that really helped me center and focus myself. I feel like that's something people don't hear enough. And what I do now in order to kind of balance that, because I feel like if you're that person, it's not going to magically go away and no longer be a part of you. So how I balance that is I usually take a meeting with an entrepreneur like once a week and talk about their business problems and what they have going on and talk about how to solve them, which lets me flex that muscle without trying to start 800 different companies.
Yeah.
Every other day. I think part of it too is we have a core value of being a student of your craft, right? And lots of times when you're starting a business, even if you've been through business school, it doesn't matter what you've learned before. Nothing really prepares you for starting a business. So one of our core values, one of the things I stress to my team, one of the things I stress for myself is sometimes we need to learn the same lessons over and over and over again in order to understand it. And even just what we're ready to take in when we encounter that lesson. So I compare it back to, you know, at least here in the States, what we learned about Thanksgiving in kindergarten, we were doing the Thanksgiving pageant, versus what we understood about Thanksgiving by the time we were finishing high school and entering university. It was a completely different experience. And some that's just based on maturity and what we're ready to learn and how we're moving forward and just more of a global understanding. But we have to be students of our craft to keep things moving. And then I think the third part of that is, I always say there's the difference between the person who writes the business plan and the person who actually goes out and does it. Lots of times I find aspiring entrepreneurs get stuck in that, like, I've been working on my business plan for 15 years. And I'm like, okay, nothing's ever going to be perfect. When are you going to do something about it? So that ability to, take risk and make things happen, but also know that where you start today isn't going to be where you end up even after the first week of business. I actually started this business with a partner that lasted maybe like 2 months, because about a month and a half in, she was like, when do we get paid? And I was like, you don't understand how this works. Like, we're providing a service. We need to pay the service providers. We're just starting. Like, we're not going to be millionaires overnight. But that was completely like, no, we wrote this business model the very first day and it's already being changed. Like, you have to be willing to not be stuck. Like, it doesn't have to be written in stone. Even going into the pandemic, I remember having this conversation where I was like, we had this amazing idea for business growth. And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, I had to put it on a shelf. And we'd spent all this time on it, putting this together, but I put it on a shelf. And I'm like, one day I may pull it off the shelf, but I may never pull it off the shelf. And as an entrepreneur, you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, my experience is you start off with business plan A and it goes to business plan G at least before you probably make a profit. There are many iterations, but taking your talent of being creative, right? That's one talent. You're also, in our business DNA, discovery reporting, you're an influencer. So you're charismatic, and that's pretty obvious from the conversation, but also extremely resilient, fast paced, quick with the ideas, rational, being a decision maker. But I think something that you've touched on a few times, but not totally unpacked for me, or I'm going to make you unpack it, is partly why has your business been successful in terms of it growing? And I think there's something that you've been doing that's different, Kenzie, in the culture that you've been building with the executive assistants. Because it's one thing just to go out and recruit them or find them and then line them up with a company and get paid and pay them. But there's something more than that that's going on. That's part of your special sauce, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. So I decided pretty early in my business that culture was important, and we were going to figure culture out and make it a cornerstone of how we operate. And I'm so happy we did, because I feel like I can't even say coming out of, in learning to live with the pandemic, we are still a lot of companies who are dealing with people leaving, who are dealing with not being able to engage people long-term. For me, a lot of it comes back to not having a culture that truly defines who your team is and how they operate. A lot of companies have written, I see two things happen. They've written cultures that only can exist within the walls of a building. So then all of a sudden you send somebody home and you can't have a party every Friday, in the conference room. And is that truly a culture, or is that something that you just do for your team? And more importantly, I always tell people, once you get beyond 3 employees, if you don't have a firm culture in place, something's going to be decided for you, and it's not going to be authentic to who you are. I also see the struggle a lot, especially with women, that they feel like they need to create this soft and cuddly culture and everything's like hugs and, we celebrate and balloons. And I'm like, that's not who I am. Like, my team knows, like, I will laugh, I'll build a relationship with you, but I'm not like, come and cry on my shoulder. I was joking earlier that my wedding planner, who's a very good friend, when he did the final reveal of what our wedding was going to look like, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Okay. And he was just like, why aren't you crying? What's happening? Like, why aren't you excited in a different way? So I feel like society, we as leaders, individuals, have very much put this pressure on ourselves of what culture is supposed to look like. So I went in and said, how do we build an authentic culture to us? How do we really dig into, because one, we're helping form a relationship that can thrive together, but we're also helping people do what they love, right? So it goes back to all those EAs that were misplaced in the Great Recession. A lot of people got misplaced again at the beginning of the pandemic. So how do we help them do what they love and form relationships with people that will thrive? And because of our investment into our culture and core values, I mean, we reached $1 million in revenue with basically no marketing. And it was primarily driven by referrals from clients and referrals from other EAs to join our team.
Yeah, so that says something about the culture, that it's strong and it's authentic and people believe in you and there's trust in it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is different about Worxbee compared to other VA firms who are bringing on executive assistants, in your space? Where do you see yourself as being a little bit different? Because the team is staying with you.
Yeah. So number one thing I would say is that we authentically connect with and can identify true executive assistants. And that is something that a lot of our peers just don't do a great job at. And part of that's because we focus more on experience than we do checking items off the list.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of folks out there who really celebrate, like, everybody has a college degree. But I'm like, going to college does not teach you necessarily how to be an executive assistant. There's very little programming out there for how to be an executive assistant. So we really do celebrate the experience that someone has and that they bring to the table. And we create community within our community. So all of our EAs, we have Slack channels that we maintain. Our EAs talk to each other. They can ask questions. We celebrate birthdays the same way you would in an office, but online. I post a video every Friday, which I've been doing since before the pandemic started. And I mean, it's very transparent, and we tackle some tough subjects. We offer training. Our entire team is there. But just to see the community, to see EAs answering each other's questions and helping each other out, like, that's what gets me excited. It's the community that people feel like I'm not alone and not siloed. One big thing that people miss is that being an EA is an extremely lonely job. Even if you're in the office, you are the holder of all the secrets. So you just can't form casual relationships the way everybody else would, because you know when times are good, you know when times are bad. And that's a lot of stress to carry. So to have a place where EAs can come together and talk to each other, be authentic with each other, build community with each other, it's special.
So that's a very big point, that it's a lonely experience as an EA because you're operating there by yourself. You're privy to a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with it? You're probably seeing some things that are right, some things that maybe are wrong. And that could be difficult to deal with, getting experience shares.
Yes.
From others. So that community piece is important. But I think there's a third thing that you do as well, if I'm right. It's the matching up with the executive that your executive assistants are working with. Mm-hmm. You don't just take any old executive.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. So we have several things. So we have our psychodemographics of our client and our EA profile are based on, one, you believe in the right person in the right seat. You believe in building meaningful relationships, and you believe in our core values. So the same way we expect our EAs to have an executive mindset and see possibilities, we expect our clients to too, because they should have an executive mindset in building this relationship and allowing their EA to really be on their executive team. But they should also see the possibilities of how the EA can help them, right? So and sometimes it's interesting to people. They're like, you hold your clients to the same expectations you hold the team that's supporting them to? Yes, because it is a mutual relationship, which calls on both of them to really honor each other's skill sets and celebrate each other. And we're not in the business of like, here's 50 people, just choose someone and it'll be okay. We really do take a refined approach to who's going to be the best person for you. Yes, we have to get the skill set right, but also, who are you going to communicate well with? Who are you going to build a relationship well with? Who do you share the same views of how trust is formed with in order to build a relationship? And do we nail it 100% of the time? No, but usually we get it by the second time if we haven't nailed it the first time. But it is, for some reason, Well, no, not for some reason. I go back to the statement I made before about the Great Recession and how people got so focused on operations. We meet a lot of people who are so focused on operations, and then we start digging into the relationship, and they're like, oh, I should be thinking about this with all of my team members and how we all come together. Because that's when you get into that core value alignment, and people want to succeed, and people want to help you succeed because they believe in you, and there's a commitment to each other, not just I'm checking an item off a list.
Yeah, no, I think you've got three really good legs of the stool there with this. So Kenzie, just taking that forward and piecing this together, how do you want your executive assistants who are on your team, the growing number, and there'll be more in the future, and even the employer, the executive, how do you want them to see you in the future? How do you want them to see your identity and remember you?
That's a loaded question. I mean, so I have big vision dreams about how we'll continue to help move the relationship forward. I really do want us to make an impact as far as, yes, Worxbee is very driven by company culture and community, but I want to share that with the world. I want every client we work with, I want every EA we work with taking that into their clients' companies to help them think more wholeheartedly about how do they build a meaningful workplace, whether remote or in person, where people see a path to success. We can create sustainable wages. We can create ways to honor transferable skills and that continuing education and being a student of your craft. I mean, when I think about it, it is more than just me. Yeah. It is the ability to influence how we as a world come together and celebrate each other's professional skill sets in order to work, to create more meaningful work and make it just a better, I know that sounds, people are like, I'm very based on abundance, right? So how do we make it based so everybody is focused on winning together and that there is abundance together, and we get out of this only a piece of the pie mindset, just to build a better environment? Because if we are focused on abundance for all over a piece of the pie, it means there's enough room for everybody to share success in doing what they love.
Yeah, I like the everybody winning together. I think that's really important. And, what I've been hearing as I've been tying this together, I just sort of put it back to you, Kenzie, is, being a meaningful workplace community builder, or building meaningful workplace communities.
Yes.
Seems to be what your talent is, and your passion and desire. Exactly. And what your company is in fact doing, because you're not only influencing the executive assistant working for you, but you're actually influencing the workplace that they're part of, because they're not only in your workplace, they're also in the workplace of the person they work for as well. And you're seeing changes come there in how operational people are starting to build relationships. So you're a big catalyst for change in how you're approaching this.
Yes, trying. I mean, I think it's all building the relationship with people so they will listen. I give people the example of, we were talking about how to take our clients' companies virtual early in February of 2020, because being a visionary and seeing the writing on the wall. So it's all about, it goes back to that abundance and winning together idea. Like, if you're willing to share to help propel people forward, that's how we all make it a better environment.
Yeah, and I think, let's take away the word trying to be. You, and I'll play coach for one nanosecond. You are being that. You are doing it, right?
Thank you.
And you're going to do more and more of it. And I think this is a great identity for you in workplace leadership. And more of this is going to be needed as we go around potentially into another recession coming up.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. What is a speed hump? After talking to a banker, I'm like, what is a speed hump we're going to go over, and how are we navigating it together?
If you do this properly, though, I think your business will be one of those ones that rises out of this next phase of all of our lives very well, because meaning is going to be a big part of it. So Kenzie, as we wrap up, have you got one tip out there for our listeners that you'd like to convey?
Oh, one tip out there that I'd like to convey. I think I would go back to abundance, right? So for everyone listening, if you move forward and you start thinking about, where am I looking at things in a place of scarcity in my life versus a place of abundance? Does it cause me to make a different decision that could therefore leave a positive impact on others? So that would be my one thing I would love to leave everybody with.
Yeah, and I think that's a great legacy. And the, you know, the executives hiring your executive assistants certainly need to remember that, and the way you lead your company, that needs to keep flowing through everything. And you'll be very successful. So thank you, Kenzie, for spending some time with me this afternoon for this conversation. It's been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you a bit better as well.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you.